capital of Georgia, where there have been all sorts of protests over this new law. The protesters are calling it the Russia law. They're accusing huge Russian influence about this new sort of form of censorship, about shutting down media organisations, about arresting individuals with the wrong opinions. Essentially, what we're seeing here in the rain, with some gas masks and confrontations against the police here, is a big protest in favour of free speech and against sort of any autocratic encroachment on people's rights to say what they think.
Yes, lots of them with these gas masks around their necks or on their face, indeed, waving flags there. A huge gathering there in the capital of Georgia. Activists have been breaking down barriers outside the buildings. Tension seems to be escalating following this controversial law being passed. It's clear they believe this threatens fundamental civil rights, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of association even.
Now, it's worth bearing in mind that 2 years ago, in 2022, Russia itself passed a law known as the Foreign Agents Law. This is the law in Russia that has allowed Vladimir Putin to detain foreign journalists, been able to kick out foreign media and all the rest of it. Well, now this similar-sounding foreign agent law has been put to the Georgian Parliament. And here's a very interesting quote from the Prime Minister of Georgia, who says that if any deputies are going to vote against this bill at its third reading, if they're going to vote it down, then Georgia would lose sovereignty, and these are his words, easily share the same fate as Ukraine. That sounds like a man who's been threatened.
So the Prime Minister is essentially claiming there that this bill makes people safer in his country, but others will see this as giving in to Vladimir Putin. Very interesting to see so many people amassed there protesting this particular bill.
It's easy to forget that actually in 2008, Georgia was invaded by Russia, not in a full-scale invasion, but they nabbed a fair bit of the country. And I suppose the Prime Minister of Georgia is thinking, my goodness me, Georgia is a small country, not a huge population. It's easy to see how if they don't do what potentially the Russians have told them to do, they could share that same fate of Ukraine, facing a large invasion. That seems to be the big risk over all of this. But here people are exercising their democratic rights that currently exist in Georgia, saying, that's not worth the risk. Don't take our democratic rights away. What's the point in living in a peaceful country if that country is not free?
It's quite interesting, isn't it, the specifics of this bill, that NGOs and independent media that receive more than 20% of their funding from foreign donors, they'd have to register as organisations bearing the interests of a foreign power, and they'd been monitored, subject to monitoring by the Justice Ministry, and could potentially be forced to share sensitive information. So these people out here, extremely worried by the looks of things, that this is a threat to their basic civil rights.
Effectively state control of media that's trying to sort of expose what's going on.
We live in a globalised world. You know, so many media companies have investments from different countries and so on.
Especially with a small country like Georgia, most media potentially, or at least a huge part of it, will be having a proportion of its funding coming from other countries. Only 3.7 million people live in Georgia. That's about a third the size of London. So this is clearly a massive encroachment on the freedom of the press, but also of individuals too, and a big standoff really between Georgia and Russia, all in the context of the war in Ukraine.
And this here, what we're looking at, looks like a standoff, does it not? To the right of the screen, I believe that is where the riot police are. You've got the protesters facing them head on. At the moment, there is no the tensions haven't escalated into violence that we're seeing at the moment. It very much does look like a standoff.
And not just a standoff outside Parliament, also a fight broke out between politicians, elected politicians within the Georgian Parliament, which is just an extraordinary sight. But the way that this is all working now is that in order for a bill to become law in Georgia, just like in the United Kingdom, it has to be signed by the head of state. In our case, that's royal assent from the king. In their case, it's got to be signed by the president to become law. So the president has 2 weeks after the passing of a bill to sign that bill into law. And what these protesters are all getting out there onto the streets to do is to say, President Salome Zorabishvili, please don't sign this bill into law.
Very interesting indeed. We'll keep an eye on what's going on in Tbilisi in Georgia for you. But we're going to go... Not quite yet.
It's worth saying that the Georgian president has said that she will veto this bill, but if a two-thirds majority in the parliament vote to override that veto, they can do so, and they do have the votes to do so. So it's a complicated process here, but it does look like there is undeniably some fear here about Russian aggression and intimidation.